episode 44, Mormon 1 through 6, Cumorah, Hill of Destruction. And you can always find us at Prophetic Appointments. And I'm Farrell.
And I'm Rhonda Pickering. And I got the sad one.
You got the sad one.
Yeah.
Cumorah Land, The Last Stand.
So Cumorah Land, The Last Stand is actually a video that was produced by Wayne May that you can get on his site, Ancient American. And I'm just very grateful that he was kind enough to actually share a lot of his slides with me. I'm going to do some of them from Cumorah Land, but if you want the rest of the story, you need to go to Wayne May's site.
And we love Wayne May. Support him all you can.
Absolutely, yes. And we're going to stand on the shoulders of some giants today. So, there's...
Talking about the Jaredites?
Talking about the Jaredites. We'll talk about them too.
A little later.
Some giants in the research area of Book of Mormon evidence. So, are you ready?
I'm ready. All
right, let's go. We're going to start, of course, in Mormon chapter 1. The last couple of verses of 4th Nephi, we learned that the prophet Amoron is going to hide up the records. I'm in verse 48, which were sacred, even all the sacred records that had been handed down from generation to generation, even until the 320th year from the coming of Christ. And he did hide them up unto the Lord, that they might come again unto the remnant of the house of Jacob, according to the prophecies and promises of the Lord. And so we have here records that are being protected by the Lord to come forth in due time. And so in Mormon chapter 1, and I being 15 years of age, being somewhat of a sober mind, therefore I was visited of the Lord and tasted and knew of the goodness of Jesus. That's pretty amazing that he saw the Lord. When he's 15, he will be leading the armies. By the time he's 16, in the first few verses of chapter 1, we're told that when he was 10 years old, Amoron told him that he would be responsible for the records. That seems kind of like an oxymoron to me, that the general of the army is also the keeper of the records, because, it seems like a risky business to be the general of the army. But it says that when Amoron told him when he was 24 years old that he was to go and deposit the sacred engravings, and so in the hill. And so in Mormon chapter, in verse 2 of chapter 2, we see that he was in his 16th year, that he did go forth at the head of an army of Nephites against the Lamanites. We also learn that he was large in stature, so he looked older than he was, and I'm sure that he had excellent training under his father. In verse 8, but behold, the land was filled with robbers and with Lamanites. And notwithstanding the great destruction which hung over my people, they did not repent of their evil doings. Therefore there was blood and carnage spread throughout all the face of the land, both on the part of the Nephites and also on the part of the Lamanites. And it was one complete revolution throughout all the face of the land. Now, I think this is important, because what we're going to see as we read through these chapters is that there is a parallel here between the destruction that occurred to the Nephites at the hill Cumorah and the destruction of the Gentiles in the last days. And you're going to see Mormon again and again call out to the Gentiles, don't let this kind of thing happen to you. And again, we see that their government has deteriorated at this point into anarchy, one complete revolution throughout all the face of the land. And in verse 9, and now the Lamanites had a king, and his name was Aaron, and he came against us with an army of 44,000. And I withstood him with 42,000. And it came to pass that I beat him with my army, and he fled before me. Now you're going to see, as these last and final battles take place, that there's going to be 3 times that they are delivered, and they are going to, instead of being humble and thanking God, they are going to rejoice and boast in their own strength. And again, this culture, this society has totally turned from God and to their own strength. And even when they are sorrowing because of a loss, Mormon says in verse 13, but behold, my joy was in vain because their sorrowing was not unto repentance. And so this is kind of like the sorrow that you feel when you've been caught, not the sorrow that's going to prevent you from doing wrong.
Kind of like the sorrow of, I will avenge you.
And it was the sorrowing of the damned, Mormon actually says, because the Lord would not always suffer them to take happiness in sin. And it came to pass that my sorrow did return again to me, and I saw that the day of grace was past with them, both temporally and spiritually. And so that's pretty sobering to realize that you can get to a point when the day of grace is past and it is judgment time. In verse 19, he says, and woe is me because of their wickedness. For my heart has been filled with sorrow because of their wickedness all my days. That's kind of not the image you get of Mormon compiling this Book of Mormon for us, that his existence was sorrow for the wickedness of his people all his days. But he takes courage, nevertheless, I know that I shall be lifted up at the last day. And I think that's a beautiful example of, even in the midst of what he will describe himself as a hopeless situation, that he knows that his relationship with the Lord is solid and that he will be lifted up at the last day. As we get to the last verse in chapter 2, and of course I wish we could read the whole thing, but we can't for sake of time, so I'm jumping a little bit and just catching the main highlights. But I think there's something critical to see here in Mormon at the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3 that is going to play into the logic of where this could have happened and where this could take place. You can see here Wayne May's just a map of the general locations that we were speaking of in the Book of Mormon. And we'll talk for a minute the reasons of why he's got it up around the Great Lake area. But let's go ahead and read verse 29. And the Lamanites did give us the land northward, yea, even the narrow passage which led into the land southward. And we did give unto the Lamanites all the land southward. Okay, so this is after many battles. They make a treaty with the Lamanites, and they've basically been pushed up into the north, and all of the land south has been turned over to the Lamanites. And you know, if you are using a Isthmus of Darius model, then you would say, okay, then all of the land north of Central America and Mexico would be the northern lands, and then the southern lands would be South America and everything. And so the point that we're trying to make here is that we have this division of the land southward and the land northward, and in the very next verse, it says, and it came to pass that the Lamanites did not come to battle again until 10 years more had passed away. And behold, I had employed my people, the Nephites, for 10 years in preparing their lands and their arms against the time of battle. Now, if you're going to go with a theory that the final battle happened in that in Cumorah up in New York, but Mormon Moroni is going to actually take the plates and travel up north here. I just want you to see here that
Not logical.
that all this time is being employed preparing for battle, not migrating with all the people up to the hill Cumorah in New York. Okay, this division of the land, north and south, and then preparing for battle is immediate and in the vicinity of each other there. So we're going to talk about the three different mound builders of North America.
Major cultures.
The major cultures. We have the late Archaic or Adena culture that fits the time frame of our Jaredites. We have the Hopewell that show up in the archaeological record in 500 BC and disappear in 500 AD. So we have a group of people that exactly fits our Nephite timeline in the Book of Mormon archaeologically. And this is not done by Mormon researchers. This is by archaeologists that are not with an agenda in mind. This timeline fits our Nephites and our Mulekites and our Lamanites. And then after 500 AD, we are going to hit a culture that comes in that is post Book of Mormon. This would be the Lamanites and the descendants of Lehi that are after the destruction of the Nephites. And they're going to have a time frame from 900 AD to 1400 AD that's identified as the Mississippian culture. This is going to be, well, in my opinion, as I've studied it, it's more of a degraded culture because they offer human sacrifice and other things like that. So
almost a break off from the Mayans.
And we're actually going to see that occurring at the very end of our Nephite civilization. So the sacrificing to idols is going to be already being influenced there as we move into that Mississippian culture. And this is just a map to show you that the Mesoamerican model of the geography of the Book of Mormon is, you can see it down there with the South America and the Isthmus of Darius right there. And then we have another model that's been proposed for the Book of Mormon geography that's just around the Great Lakes and not in the larger area of what we would call the Hopewell interaction sphere. So this is archaeologically where you find the remnants of the Hopewell culture here, okay? And again, this is a culture that fits our Book of Mormon timeline. All right, this is from the Catalog of Prehistoric Works East of the Rocky Mountains by Cyrus Thomas. And what you see here are all Hopewell archaeological sites. And the point here is to show you how much evidence there is of the Hopewell civilization in what would be the northern and eastern push as the Lamanites are pushing them, according to the Book of Mormon, to the north and to the east. In the Aboriginal Monuments of New York by E.G. Squire, written in 1849, in their surveys, they had identified over 200 fortified hilltops in western New York State. And that's, of course, where the hill Cumorah is going to be located.
That doesn't even include Ohio and all the other places.
Right. And this is in our, they are identified from 200 to 400 AD in our Book of Mormon timeline, that they have this evidence that is showing up there. And of course, we know that this is the same area that in Zion's Camp March, Joseph Smith wrote home to Emma and said, "This is the plains of the Nephites, and we are picking up the bones of this people from the Book of Mormon in this Ohio, Indiana, and of course in the Hill Cumorah, New York area in that final retreat." So the evidences of the mound builders, we're reading from the Archaeological History of New York by Arthur Parker. The evidences of the mound builders are more numerous in Western New York. The culture seems to have entered the state along the shores of Lake Erie and up from the Allegheny River. Catawba, Erie, and Cattaraugus counties contain more earthworks and mounds. And then it says that, so what we're seeing is they've entered in from the west, and they are moving along from the shores of Lake Erie towards New York. And this is just according to archaeology and what we find with the mound builder country. Is that this is where the archaeology shows
Where the archaeological record comes
from the earliest to the latest information. All right, and of course Wayne goes into a lot more detail with all of these things, but here we see major forts that were built. You can see that they're trying to guard from the east, and then they're going to be guarding from going around from the lake there. There in Wayne County, you can see where Cumorah is located. And so here you have these heavy forts, these palisades built on top of mounds and ditches, just like Hugh Nibley said was more like what we see in the Book of Mormon being described in Alma as he talks about the fortifications that they were building. And again, this is when they would have been fortifying for the last battle. Now here you can see the narrow strip of land between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and you can see that there's the Allegheny Mountains right down there at the lower part of the slide. And this is where we find all of the fortresses. This is where we find the remains of where they would have been fortifying in this heartland model that we're talking about. So there you can see the mountain range that would have been protecting on the one edge. You have the Ohio River acting as a boundary. In a lot of ways, when they retreated up to the Hill Cumorah, they were doing the same kind of thing that they did in the center of the land when they were trying to fortify themselves against the Gadianton robbers. They were using the natural geography of the land as a way to defend themselves, of course. And so this is the direction from which they would have to defend themselves from an attacking Lamanite army in the west. And they could have come across this narrow strip of land between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and they would have had to have forts right there. And of course, all of these blue dots are where the archaeological remains of these forts have been found. Mormon chapter 3 says, "And it came to pass that I did cause my people that they should gather themselves together at the land Desolation, to a city which was in the borders by the narrow pass which led into the land southward. And there we did place our armies, that we might stop the armies of the Lamanites, that they might not get possession of any of our lands. Therefore we did fortify against them with all our force." And so here we can see that there's archaeology that backs up that this was a big defense position from a people that match our Book of Mormon timeline that were being pushed north and east in exactly the right time frame. All right, Mormon chapter 3, verse 12. "Behold, I had led them, notwithstanding their wickedness. I had led them many times to battle, and I had loved them, according to the love of God which was in me, with all my heart. and my soul had been poured out in prayer unto my God all the day long for them. Nevertheless, it was without faith, because of the hardness of their hearts. And thrice have I delivered them out of the hands of their enemies, and they have repented not of their sins. So sometimes I think in the Book of Mormon, we have a tendency to think good guys and bad guys. And I think in the text, they actually try to get us not to do that, because of course we saw in Helaman and in those chapters with Samuel the Lamanite and everything, that it had completely flipped. It was actually
At this point, it's probably bad guys and bad guys.
Exactly. And that is the point. The point is that this would never have happened if they had been turning to God, if they had repented. It says, thrice I had delivered them, and they had not repented of their sins. And then we get to verse 16, where Mormon says, and it came to pass that I utterly refused to go up against mine enemies, and I did even as the Lord had commanded me, and I did stand as an idle witness. So he laid down his generalship and refused to lead them anymore because of the atrocities that they were doing in war. Remember, in Alma, Mormon has gone to great lengths to show us what is righteous warfare and what is unrighteous warfare. And you don't torture and be cruel to the captives. And this is the type of thing that's going on. And several times Mormon's going to tell us, I don't want to tell you what was really going on, and I'm not going to do that on these plates. I'll do that in another record. But I don't want to harrow up your souls in sorrow for the depravity of the people and what was going on. In verse 16, he stands as an idle witness to manifest unto the world the things which I saw and heard, according to the manifestations of the Spirit, which had testified of these things to come. And of course, we know that Alma had prophesied that this would happen if the people turned from their light and truth. Nephi had seen the destruction as well. And so, again, this is not the good guys and the bad guys. This is the Lord allowing the wicked to take out the wicked. And again, this is a type for us. Here it is in chapter 3, verse 17. Because of all this situation, therefore I write unto you, the Gentiles. Mormon is going to constantly turn and take what he's recording and direct it through over the periods of time to the time in the last days when the Gentiles are being threatened with judgment for the same reasons that the Nephites were threatened with judgment. And he's going to make that very clear in verse 22. And I would that I could persuade all ye ends of the earth to repent and to prepare to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. So in this time where the Gentiles get the broom for turning against the Lord, and there's wars and rumors of wars throughout the world, there's that reality check that people need to prepare to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Here again in this map, you can see that there are literally between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario here, barricading that entrance there from the north and the west, 20 forts that extend over 50 miles. And this is, you'll also notice that these forts are up against the lake shores, and it's been shown geologically that the water table is lower now than it was. But if you bring the water tables up to even early America and everything, you can see that these forts that are a little bit inland now
Went shore to shore.
used to be shore to shore. Okay, and then again, you have the natural defenses there. This is Genesee County, a number of very interesting remains formerly existed in this country. It will ultimately be seen that its ancient works, 20 enclosures, constitute part of a chain extending from the Lake Ridge on the north to the southwest, a distance of 50 miles. And it was because the armies of the Nephites went up unto the Lamanites that they began to be smitten. For were it not for that, the Lamanites could have had no power over them, Mormon tells us in Mormon chapter 4, verse 4. They had the secure defense position. They had the same type of situation that Laconius had in the southern tip of Illinois when he was
But they
surrounded by
decided to
two
go
rivers.
offensive.
Exactly. And if you remember, they wanted to go out and attack the Lamanites, and Gidgiddoni said, no, don't do it. You will only be protected if you defend, not attack. And again, we've seen that over and over again, that the Lord delivers them in the defense. And only when commanded by the Lord to go out and be the aggressor that's kind of a rare situation. Most of the time they're told to stay put and defend. But of course, Mormon is not their general at this point because they wouldn't listen to him if he was. And he informs us that because they went out and they tried to attack, that they began to be driven and slaughtered with an exceedingly great slaughter. And here's that verse: the women and their children were sacrificed unto idols. So we can see the depravity here, not only of the Nephites, but the Lamanites as well. And it is the reason that Mormon has no hope for their deliverance. All right, this is just another account of this same type of archaeological evidence that from the Journal of James E. Talmage, Professor William C. Mills, state archaeologist of Ohio, writes this in 1917. The political boundaries defining the state of Ohio was once inhabited by two distinct peoples, representing two cultures, a higher and a lower. Now, your higher culture would be the Nephites because they had metal technology and government, and then there was a lower culture. And these two cultural types or distinct peoples were generally in a state of hostility one toward the other. This is just from the archaeological record from a non-Mormon, William C. Mills. These two cultural types or distinct peoples were generally in a state of hostility one toward another, the lower culture being more commonly the aggressor and the higher the defender. From a careful collating of data, it is demonstrated that the general course of migration through the area now defined as the state of Ohio was inward from the west and outward towards the east.
Headed to Cumorah.
Headed to Cumorah. So again, we have another independent archaeological reference showing this same migration that we see in the Book of Mormon in these final years. Now, in Mormon chapter 1, we talked about the fact that Ammoron assigned Mormon to be responsible for the records. Therefore, when you are about 20 and 4 years old, I would that you should remember the things. How did Ammoron know that he should do this when he was 24?
Obviously, he had some kind of vision or something.
Yeah, that you should remember the things that you have observed concerning this people. And when you are of that age, go to the land Antum, unto a hill which shall be called Shem. Now, we're going to be able to go through some early church history records and see where the hill Shem is. And there I have deposited unto the Lord all the sacred engravings concerning this people. Then in chapter 4, when Mormon gets to be that age, seeing that the Lamanites were about to overthrow the land, therefore I did go to the hill Shem, and I did take up all the records which Ammoron had hid unto the Lord. So obviously, for some reason, Mormon feels that their records aren't safe there. So in Mormon chapter 4, we see him removing the records from the hill Shem. And now I, Mormon, seeing that the Lamanites were about to overthrow the land, therefore I did go to the hill Shem and did take up all the records which Ammoron had hid unto the Lord. And it came to pass, in the next verse in chapter 5, that I did go forth among the Nephites and did repent of the oath which I had made that I would no more assist them. So it's kind of like, get the record safe, and now I go with no hope to lead the people. And they gave me command again of their armies, for they looked upon me as though I could deliver them from their afflictions. But behold, I was without hope, for I knew the judgments of the Lord, which should come upon them, for they repented not of their iniquities, but did struggle for their lives without calling upon that being who created them. Go ahead and read verse 9 and 10.
Daring not to give a full account of the things which I have seen, because of the commandment which I have received, and also that ye may not have too great of sorrow, because of the wickedness of this people. And now behold, this I speak unto their seed, and also to the Gentiles, who have care for the house of Israel, that realize and know from whence their blessings come.
I hope we do know from whence our blessing comes.
Well, a few do, but the bulk of the Gentiles, I think, are not paying attention.
So there's that part that talks about him not recording basically the gory details. All right, now at this point, we're going to talk about the actual hill Cumorah, where this last battle is going to be staged. And the letter that we're going to be looking at, which was written by Oliver Cowdery with the assistance of the prophet Joseph Smith, is just so that you know that how common it was in early church history. It was first published in the Latter-day Saint Messenger and Advocate in Kirtland, Ohio in 1834 and 1835. And again, I said that we're standing on the shoulders of giants here. I'm super grateful that David Hawking allowed me to use some of the work that he's done in the annotated Book of Mormon. And then also, of course, the one that came forth with Oliver Cowdery's Letter 7 and wrote the book about it would be Jonathan Neville. And all of these aids are available. I'm just barely touching the tips of the icebergs here. But it was originally published in Kirtland in 1834 and 35, and it was so important that Joseph and his scribes copied them into these letters into his personal history. And in 1840, Joseph gave them to his brother Don Carlos, and they were published in the Times and Seasons in Nauvoo. And Joseph encouraged Benjamin Winchester up in Pennsylvania to republish these letters in the Gospel Reflector in 1841. Elder Parley P. Pratt published them in England in the Millennial Star. And William Smith of the 12, brother of the prophet Joseph Smith, republished them in New York City in the newspaper, The Prophet. So letter 7 talks about the hill Cumorah in New York and was republished just 2 days after the martyrdom of Joseph Smith and Hiram in June of 1844. President Joseph F. Smith of the First Presidency republished the letters again in the Improvement era in Salt Lake City, and the following letter is taken from the Joseph Smith Papers, Histories, Volume 1. So just to see how well accepted these letters were in church history. So there are actually, like, I could pull 7 quotes out of this letter, but I'm only going to do one for the sake of time. And this is the one where President Oliver Cowdery writes, "At about 1 mile west rises another ridge of less height, running parallel with the former, speaking of the hill Cumorah, leaving a beautiful vale between. The soil is of the first quality for the country and under a state of cultivation which gives a prospect at once imposing, while one reflects on the fact that here, okay, so we're talking about the hill Cumorah in New York, and a valley of about a mile across and another ridge of mountains there. And here in this valley, between these hills, the entire power and national strength of both the Jaredites and the Nephites were destroyed. Okay, now either Joseph Smith didn't know what he was talking about here when he worked with Oliver Cowdery to write these letters, or he did. And I'm going to go with the fact that he did. I believe Joseph Smith knew. All right, and I don't think that he changed his mind. And I think he was interested as other facts and information came to light, but the things that were written in the Times and Seasons can be shown to probably have not been under his editorship because he was in hiding from the marshals that were trying to take him back to Missouri. By turning to the 529th and 530th pages of the Book of Mormon, Oliver Cowdery here is talking about the very first 1830 edition. You will read Mormon's account of the last great struggle of his people as they were encamped round this hill, Cumorah. In this valley fell the remaining strength and pride of a once powerful people, the Nephites. So here's a picture of the hill Cumorah in New York in 1907. And here on this little map, you can see the two ridges with the One Mile Valley in between that Oliver Cowdery was referring to. Here you can see it from a satellite image. The one on the right is going to be the hill Cumorah with the mail road running alongside it. There is your valley. And then this ridge over here is, for a couple of reasons in the Book of Ether that we'll read, probably could be referring to the hill Shim. So here's it is in Ether chapter 9, verse 3, and the Lord warned Omer in a dream that he should depart out of the land. Wherefore Omer departed out of the land with his family and traveled many days, and came over and passed by the hill of Shim, and came over the place where the Nephites were destroyed, and that from thence eastward. So you can see from this account that Mormon is giving is that the hill Shim is near the place where the Nephites were destroyed.
In the valley between, yep.
And of course, the Nephites were destroyed at the hill Cumorah. Now, if you just look at the logistics of what we're talking about here, in the model of the South America model, we have Lehi landing on the coast of Chile right here, and Book of Mormon events. And this is according to some articles that were released again in 1842 in the Times and Seasons. Jonathan Neville has written a book called Smoking Gun that totally explains what happened, how those articles got published. And, I actually think that the linchpin is that in the fall, right after these articles came out in August and in September, Joseph Smith fired William Smith as editor, released Benjamin Winchester as state president, and resigned himself the editorship of the Times and Seasons. And I think that is quite a statement as historically how he felt about those articles being published. Again, you can go into more details about it in the book Smoking Gun. But here we have in Mesoamerica here, where people are speculating that the hill Cumorah was where this final battle took place, that Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery and all these other brethren are very clear happened in
Up
New
in Cumorah.
York, right? And in these different models in Mesoamerica, we have at least 4 different claims of where
It all
this
happened.
second hill Cumorah was. Okay. And then, of course, if you're going to have that be the place of the final battle, then we're going to have Moroni carrying those plates all the way across all these different sites that we have in church history where we have accounts of Moroni, and making his way all the way up to the hill Cumorah with the plates, which is going to present another issue. And the issue is going to be from the next quote. By the way, this theory started to develop in the 1970s. All right, so this is a quote from the Journal of Discourses by Brigham Young, and it says that after the golden plates were translated, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery delivered the plates back to the angel Moroni. That's Joseph Smith History, verse 60. Brigham Young and others indicated that this exchange with Moroni took place at the hill Cumorah. The hill apparently opened up, and Joseph and Oliver walked into a large and spacious room. Many wagon loads of plates were in the room, and the unsheathed sword of Laban lay across the gold plates on the table. The messenger was there to receive the plates. So here we have an account that when Mormon had hidden up these records according to the instructions of Amaron, that there were wagon loads of plates.
Oh, I was going to ask if you had that cartoon.
Yeah. So we're going to have to not only have Moroni take the one set of gold plates and go 3,787 miles to hide them up in New York, but we're going to have to take a whole wagon load.
With a llama.
Mind you, while the Lamanites are trying to kill him and chase him on the way. So
it would be leaving big tracks because it would be really heavy.
Right. And so I mean, honestly, I think that you have to either find a reason why the things that were published in Times and Seasons were not Joseph Smith's feelings about it, or and I think you have to believe that Joseph Smith meant what he said in all the early accounts. We have him time and time and time again identifying the heartland as the place of stage of the Book of Mormon, and that the Indians were the forefathers of that Book of Mormon. I mean, he said that to the Sac and the Fox Indians when they came to Nauvoo. And again, we could go to quote after quote that Joseph Smith taught that was the case.
It's like so many things. When you do sufficient research, it becomes so obvious unless you just have an agenda. If you have an agenda to make it different, I guess you can believe anything for an agenda, I suppose. But it's so obvious if you don't have an agenda to just look at the facts as they are. There's just no other way.
Well, I just believe that Joseph Smith knew more than we do about the geography of the Book of Mormon.
Well, plus it's just logical. Of course, we've been there and witnessed so much of this.
All right, so in Mormon chapter 6, getting back to the text here, and it came to pass that they came to battle against us. So this is after Mormon has fortified, and this is the final battle. And when they are coming to battle, it says, Mormon says, and every soul was filled with terror because of the greatness of their numbers. Because obviously they had all been preparing for this final battle as well. And it came to pass that they did fall upon my people with the sword, and with the bow, and with the arrow, and with the axe, and with all manner of weapons of war. So looking at these hill Cumorahs, one of the arguments has been that the hill Cumorah is too small. In New York, it couldn't be the place of the final battle location because according to the text, there were 230,000 soldiers, 10,000 in each segment. And actually, this is true, but that's a misreading of the text because it doesn't say that all 230,000 soldiers were on Cumorah. It says that Mormon was in the first position up front with his 10,000 men. The remaining 220,000 were scattered upon surrounding drumlin hilltops and valley fortifications. And we've seen that in the archaeological evidence, okay? So here in Mormon 6:11, it says, and when they had gone through and hewn down all my people, save it were 24 of us, and we having survived the dead of our people, did behold on the morrow, when the Lamanites had returned to their camps from the top of the hill Cumorah, the 10,000 of my people who were hewn down, being led in the front by me. So we have only 10,000 around the Cumorah battle site right there. And here you can see the surrounding hilltops that it's talking about. Remember, it's a mile across to the other ridge. And we have different hilltops where the other tens of thousands and groups would have been stationed all around, as we've seen from the archaeological record. Now, another argument that's used against Cumorah in New York is that there are no artifacts showing a confrontation like this of hundreds of thousands.
I've heard a different story there.
Yes, and there's, that's just, I guess, not hearing the right information here. So this is Kathy Burris. This is an eyewitness account from Palmyra in 1990 when they were excavating to put in the stage for the pageant, okay? In 1990, the church rewrote the script for the Hill Cumorah pageant. This required that the entire front face of the hill be torn up in order to fit the new stage. Kathy Burris says, I remember at this time I was working at the hill for the church. My father and family were well respected, especially anything pertaining to history, artifacts, etc. Therefore, all the senior missionaries knew my father and family very well, as he was often sought after for his special local tours. So again, this is Kathy Burris who gave permission for Wayne May to share this story with us. One day, as I was working there and having a great relationship with the senior missionaries, one of the elders quietly asked me to come with him. He took me to a room in the visitor center that was locked. Upon entering, in there were boxes upon boxes of arrowheads. He told me that during the current dig, they were uncovering all these arrowheads. The church asked the current contracted excavator to quietly, discreetly keep all artifacts that they may find and store them quickly. They did not want anything leaked to the public for fear of a mass run to the hill, which could potentially cause liability issues and safety concerns during excavation. Not to mention, it could hold up the process of excavation, and they were on a very tight deadline for completion for the upcoming pageant. I remember how in awe I was to see so many boxes. He told me not to touch any, and that he probably shouldn't be showing me, but he knew I would appreciate seeing these artifacts for myself, knowing how much my father and I were local historians. It wasn't but a few days later he approached me and said that when he went to the room that morning, they were all gone. He said he believed the church had come and quietly removed them in the middle of the night for safety reasons. We can only suspect that they have also been moved to the granite vaults.
I forgot that last little bit.
So this is just Wayne May on one of his tours, and they saw this poking out of the ground, and they photographed it at its location, and there it is when they pulled it out of the ground. This is a dated, archaeologically, you can tell by the shape of the arrowheads what different culture time periods they were in. Or
Jaredite.
This is a Jaredite point. Right. So we have to remember that the hill Cumorah was the final battle scene
for both of them.
Both the Jaredites and the Nephites. All right, now here's another place where Mormon is going to stop giving the account of the battle at the hill Cumorah and talk specifically to the Gentiles about what's going on. And this is the commandment which I have received. And behold, they shall come forth according to the commandment of the Lord when he shall see fit in his wisdom. Of course, he's just talking about the records there. And behold, they shall go unto the unbelieving of the Jews, and for this intent they shall go. Now, it's probably important to mention right here that you cannot distribute a Book of Mormon in Israel legally to this day. Okay, so this has not been fulfilled in its magnitude yet. And for this intent shall they go, that they may be persuaded that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, that the Father may bring about through his most beloved his great and eternal purpose. And this is the Father's great and marvelous work, his eternal purpose, to restore the Jews, or all of the house of Israel, including the descendants of Lehi, to the land of their inheritance. And so, I mean, that's pretty easy to see that that is a future prophecy, which the Lord their God hath given them unto the fulfilling of his covenant. And in reality, all of this grand finale of end time prophecy is to orchestrate the Jews receiving the land of their inheritance according to the promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Lamanites, or the descendants of Lehi, on this land, receiving this land for their inheritance, including the believing Gentiles that are on this land. And Mormon is going to be very clear about this. And also that the seed of this people may more fully believe his gospel, which shall go forth unto them from the Gentiles. And behold, the Lord hath reserved their blessings, which they might have received in the land, for the Gentiles who will possess the land. And then, O ye Gentiles, how can you stand before the power of God, except you repent and turn from your evil ways? And we're actually going to see in the last
Reoccurring theme over and over. Repentance is such a heart's core foundational principle.
And we're going to see in the last chapters of Mormon, in the next lesson, that he is going to warn the Gentiles over and over that they will be swept from the land, just like the Nephites were, just like the Jaredites were, if they turn against their Creator and their God. And then we get to probably, I think, 5 of the most heart-wrenching verses in the Book of Mormon. Go ahead and read them.
And my soul was rent with anguish because of the slain of my people. And I cried, O ye fair ones, how could you have departed from the ways of the Lord? O ye fair ones, how could ye have rejected that Jesus who stood with open arms to receive you? Behold, if ye had not done this, ye would have fallen. You would not have fallen, I'm sorry. But behold, ye are fallen, and I mourn your loss. O ye fair sons and daughters, ye fathers and mothers, ye husbands and wives, ye fair ones, how is it that ye could have fallen? But behold, ye are gone, and my sorrows cannot bring you your return. Wow.
These are bone pits. This is from, again, the Aboriginal Monuments of New York, published in 1849, documenting that there were 250 plus bone pits and hill forts uncovered in Western New York. Pits, massive graves. Here on June 10th in 1954, we have James Talmage and I went to the hill Cumorah and viewed the spot where the plates were deposited. He, Talmage, had found, as a result of a survey and extensive analysis made by him while a student in an Eastern university, the soils of the surrounding area to be very rich in calcium and phosphate content in the soils, particularly adjacent to the hill Cumorah. To him, this discovery was the decaying of bones of the Nephite and Lamanite armies that perished there. So there's a chemical analysis. But most importantly, we have the testimony of Joseph Smith that this was Cumorah from the Book of Mormon. This is an early hymn in the first hymn book that was in Kirtland. Oh, stop and tell me, red man, who are you? Why you roam? And how you got your living? Have you no God, no home? With stature straight and portly, and decked in native pride, with feathers, paints, and brooches, he willingly replied, I once was pleasant Ephraim, when Jacob for me prayed, but oh, how blessings vanish when man from God has strayed. And we're not going to take time to read the whole hymn, but remember again that Mormon is warning us of the same fate. This is an account from the history of Joseph Smith by his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. And again, this to me is just evidence that Joseph knew so much more than we can possibly know, and yet we flip it on its head and say we know more than he did.
In so many things.
From this time forth, from Moroni's visitation, this is Lucy Mack Smith speaking, Joseph continued to receive instructions from the Lord, and we continued to get the children together every evening for the purpose of listening, while he gave us a relation of the same. Now, it's also very important to realize that Joseph Smith visited with Moroni during these years of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon over 20 times, documented. Okay, 5 just
that night,
yeah. Right? I presume our family presented an aspect as singular as any that ever lived on the face of the earth, all seated in a circle, father, mother, sons, and daughters, and giving the most profound attention to a boy 18 years of age who had never read the Bible through in his life. During our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, and the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings, and every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly, as if he had spent his whole life with them. Now, some people have postulated that maybe he was just spinning yarns and making these stories up. But this is from his brother, William Smith. Joseph Smith, at the age of 17 years, with the moral training he had received from strictly pious and religious parents, could not have conceived the idea in his mind of palming off a fabulous story, such as seeing angels, etc. There was not a single member of the family of sufficient age to know right from wrong, but what had implicit confidence in the statements made by my brother Joseph concerning his vision and the knowledge he thereby obtained concerning the plates. Father and mother believed him. Why should not the children? I suppose if he had told crooked stories about other things, we might have doubted his word about the plates. But Joseph was a truthful boy. That father and mother believed his report and suffered persecution for that belief shows that he was truthful.
That's so obvious to me. You wouldn't take all that heat for nothing.
Well, the whole family actually suffered a ton of persecution. So here's one of the verses, and like I say, in the next lesson, we're going to go into it much more fully, that all of this is being shown as an example for what will happen to the Gentiles if they reject the God of this land, Jesus Christ. And this is from Ether, chapter 2, verse 11. Moroni is pleading with us directly. And this cometh unto you, O you Gentiles, that you may know the decrees of God, that you may repent and not continue in your iniquities until the fullness come, that you may not bring down the fullness of the wrath of God upon you, as the inhabitants of the land hath hitherto done. So now we're in the last verse of Mormon chapter 6, which is our last chapter for this lesson. Oh, that ye had repented before this great destruction had come upon you. But behold, ye are gone. And the Father, yea, the eternal Father of heaven, knoweth your state. And he doth with you according to his justice and mercy. And again,
Very sobering commentary for our day.
there it is in Micah chapter 6. We love these verses. Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression and the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what the Lord doth require of thee. Go ahead.
Our new lovely saying we love, to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God, thy God.
And that is what Mormon is telling us, that God is just and merciful. But like Mormon
But he
said,
doesn't rob the justice. That's the part that is so humbling to realize what the plan included.
and
Christ.
what a scary place that Mormon said, and behold, you are past mercy.
Painful. Once again, thank you so much. It's a joy to...
I had the sad chapters.
You did have sad chapters, but it's a joy to see the wisdom and the understanding that comes from the Book of Mormon to our day. And yet, at the same time, it is very sobering. There's a lot of things very sobering in our day. But just hang in there till the completion, and everything will end really well, as long as we endure to the end is the word I'm looking for. And with that,
Till next time.
till next time.
I guess we're going to get Moroni's words
Right.
as he ends the Book of Mormon, and then we'll get Mormon's words in Moroni, and that can be confusing.
Right.
But we'll
Okay.
try and narrow that down.